Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. If you set aside the fact that the Clone Wars was a conflict orchestrated by the Sith, it's kind of impressive that the Confederacy of Independent Systems was able to challenge the Galactic Republic at all. I mean, from a pure manpower and resource point of view, the difference between the two sides was simply staggering. There are an estimated 1.2 to 1.5 million member worlds in the Galactic Republic, whereas the Separatist movement had just around 10 to 20,000 worlds. That makes the Separatist Alliance about 1 to 2% the size of the Galactic Republic. Talk about David versus Goliath. That's basically like the state of Nevada taking on the entire country in a full-on civil war. And now that I think about it, that's a pretty interesting thought exercise. I mean, Nevada has some of the most mountainous terrain in the lower 48, believe it or not. It's not just all desert, but when you do get into the desert, it's arid, hard to survive in, and ridiculously hot. Me and my editor Congo actually blasted through the Mojave National Preserve once on motorbikes, and we had to drench our shirts every 15 minutes to stay cool. And what would happen was the 125 degree heat, the dryness of the air blowing against us at 60 and 70 miles per hour acted like a blow dryer. We were just completely dry, no matter how much water we dumped on ourselves. And so actually, when the temperature got into the low hundreds, it actually felt like it was cooling down, which is wild.
It is 105 degrees and we're stuck out. My finger hurts on the phone. My phone is so hot right now. And this train just goes on for miles and miles and miles and miles. This is terrible.
For Nevada to even stand a chance against the rest of the United States, it would have to leverage all sorts of things like its terrain, its climate, and any other thing that can really equalize the playing field. Nevada is a major producer of lithium. That's a resource it can leverage against the other 49 states with limited effect. But unfortunately, Nevada doesn't produce food or a lot of manufactured goods. And so in a trade war, Nevada would ultimately lose very quickly. I think people would run out of food. Can't just go to Nobu all the time. However, Nevada does have some things going for it, like the Hawthorne Army Depot. It's one of the largest munition dumps in the United States and probably the world. Nevada also has access to some of the largest and most advanced Air Force bases in America, with advanced platforms like the F-22, F-35, and various drone fighters and bombers as well, along with probably a few alien starships that they're not telling us about. But ultimately, Nevada probably wouldn't stand a chance in an actual war against the rest of the United States because it lacks that wild card that would actually give it leverage. And despite being a testing ground for so many nukes, Nevada wouldn't be able to Mexican stand off the United States with some of its own nuclear warheads because I don't think any are actually stationed on the state. Now, the Separatists, despite being just 1 to 2% of the Galactic Republic, did have a few wild cards up its sleeve, and it wasn't just because the Sith were backing them. Their wild cards were economic and industrial in nature, and very impressive. As a matter of fact, in the opening moments of the Clone Wars, which was triggered prematurely by Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Confederacy military greatly outnumbered the Republic and probably could have marched straight to Coruscant and demanded the Senate to capitulate. So how did such a small coalition almost take down the entire galaxy? I mean, let's set aside the Republic's commitment to pacifism, which kind of gutted its warrior-like culture and military-industrial complex. Let's focus instead on the Separatist Navy. The main strength of the Separatist movement lie in the various corporate powers that actually dominate its Separatist High Council, which is the political body that really controls the Separatists. This also is my issue with overtly populist movements. Populism is oftentimes a tool used by the elites to basically take control of the masses. And so, when it comes to political leaders, if there's a political leader out there that's telling you all the right things and only saying things that you want to hear, you should be skeptical because, real homies will tell it how it is, including all the bad stuff as well. And so while Dooku was attacking the perceived injustice of the Republic and its collusion with corporate entities, behind the scenes of the Separatist Alliance, you had a bunch of oligarchs who were, furious at the Republic for its regime of regulations and laws designed to protect the consumer and small businesses. You had organizations like the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, the Corporate Alliance, the Intergalactic Banking Clan, all who benefited greatly from the establishment of the Free Trade Zone in the Outer Rim. In return for investing capital and building infrastructure in the area and hopefully, attracting workers, colonists to populate those regions, the Republic was willing to remove most taxes and tariffs from these areas. It's kind of like delaying an initial payment and then, giving a corporate entity tax abatement, which you do pay for in the long run through missed tax revenue. But again, if you don't have any cash up front, this is a great way to spur on development. And it happens all over our own planet. Of course, such arrangements have to end eventually. And in 32 BBY, Finis Valorum's Senate passed Prop 31814D, leading to the taxation of the free trade zone, which meant no more free lunches for all the companies I mentioned before. Now here's the thing, when you have an advanced capital market, you have a lot of publicly traded companies, and publicly traded companies are under a unique pressure from its shareholders. Basically, shareholders want to see continuous gains all the time, or else why would they keep their money there, right? And so this creates a short-term thinking by these companies to basically make every quarter profitable, which just doesn't make sense. And usually what you start to see is financial engineering, cooking the books, or just corrupt behavior, trying to get an edge in a not so legal way. A large decline in revenue from closing down the free trade loophole can lead to a lot of bleeding of capital. Even if the Trade Federation's fundamentals are solid and they have enough resources to pivot its operations and adapt, a lot of impatient shareholders will dump the stock and look for more lucrative stocks that are going upwards. It's just the nature of the beast, right? In a lot of ways, some of the best companies out there are probably privately held companies that can plan 10 years, into the future and accept short-term losses that are, oftentimes healthy for a company. But anyway, these publicly traded companies, these large mega conglomerates, had to pivot in a new direction after the free trade zone loophole closed, and they took a very stupid direction, if you ask me. They decided to go to war with the Republic and profit from both sides of the conflict. I mean, the Sith definitely played a role here. So mega conglomerates, because of the nature of their business and how large they are, they do business basically all across the galaxy. Most of these companies own or have stakes in entire planets, moons, and space stations. And so transportation in between all of these holdings is really important. And during the post-Rusan Reformation, basically the largest fleets you had in the galaxy were either planetary defense forces or commercial fleets, operated by companies. I mean, if you take a look at the Rebel Alliance, which borrows quite a lot from the Separatist playbook, the backbone of their fleet were dozens of MC-80 cruisers that started out life on Mount Kala as a merchant fleet. And that's kind of the pivot that separatist corporations made as well. It all starts, of course, with the free trade zone. When it was first established, the Republic had struggled and failed to stabilize the Outer Rim. The Nile Marauders essentially ended any High Republic attempt to expand into the region. And so one of the ways to attract companies out into the free trade zone was not only by eliminating tariffs and regulations, but also removing some restrictions on arming ships, because, this made sense. There were pirates, bandits, all sorts of weird alien factions that you just couldn't communicate with, and so you had a blast. And so you allow the commercial vessels to have turbo lasers on them. At first, it was just a few lasers and shields on some bulk freighters. Eventually, that led to monstrosities like the Lucrehulk battleship, a 3-kilometer in diameter sphere of a vessel that could haul around 25 million metric tons, or 4 Great Pyramids of Giza worth of stone, or millions and millions of battle droids, tanks, and vulture fighters. It's really the ultimate transport ship, and it had a massive central reactor. The Lucrehulk could essentially be covered in shield generators and weapons emplacements and still have a lot of juice left over. And when I say a lot of weapons emplacements, I mean like 51 turbo lasers, 185-point defense quad laser batteries, 520 assault laser cannons, and much, much more. Was it the most efficient design in the galaxy? Probably not, but with the entire Republic demilitarized, its sheer size alone made it a dominant ship without any rivals. Now, were the Confederacy even been systems starting a war with the Old Republic, which, had centuries of experience and naval combat, had a very well-developed military-industrial complex pumping out, second, third, fourth generation designs that were well-tested and already upgraded. I think having a bunch of freighters armed with turbo lasers is not really going to work. But that's not who the Confederacy was fighting. They were fighting the Republic. I mean, in the opening moments of the Galactic Civil War, they didn't even have any capital ships. And even when the Venator-class Star Destroyer was rolled out a few months after Geonosis, it had some severe teething issues. For instance, that long dorsal hangar bay that runs across the entire length of the ship was a very serious weak spot on the vessel that could be targeted with heavy fire. Especially if the hangar door is open. All you need is one proton torpedo to make it inside, and it's game over for the entire vessel. The Venator's reactor also fluctuated a lot and had power issues, which of course is not great in the middle of combat if, say, your deflector shield suddenly power off. The Lucrehulk, despite being the inferior design, was well tested. I mean, all the systems were pretty safe and stable and antiquated. I mean, they had tested this ship in combat against Naboo. and it also had been used as an armed transport vessel against pirates and bandits for centuries. The upgrades made to this vessel were also well established and tested, and an appropriate doctrine was developed over time to increase the combat effectiveness of this ship. There's also a significant cost saving. Something like the Imperial-class Star Destroyer or Venator-class Star Destroyer probably cost billions of credits in research and development, and then there's the procurement of the vessel, which also costs quite a lot. Most of the Lucrehulk ships used by the Trade Federation have been operating for dozens of years, some for centuries. These hulls were all paid off, and most of them had already generated billions in profits for the company. We can criticize mega conglomerates all we want. We can talk about how corrupt they are, but it's important not to get emotional when we're doing these kinds of analysis here, because there's no better entity at making money than a megacorp. They basically rig the game so they don't lose money. And so they're able to cut costs in ways that large military bureaucracies never can, and that is an efficiency that I think gives them an edge. The Seppies even automated the organic soldiers and sailors within their navy with droids. They are ruthless when it comes to protecting their profits, and considering how numbered they are, this is totally necessary for them to survive. And here's the thing, the Trade Federation wasn't the only corporate entity in the Separatist Council with its own fleet. All of these companies basically had their own fleets, own special vessels. Take a look at the Munificent-class Star Frigate. Munificent means very generous, lavish, and giving, as in giving your enemy a salvo of turbo laser fire. The Munificent-class Star Frigate made up the backbone of the Separatist Navy, and at 825 meters in length, it was classified as a pocket cruiser, as in it had decent speed and enough armament to dominate other capital ships. Essentially, this thing was an escort frigate used by the Trade Federation to protect its trade routes, but it was also used in very large numbers by the intergalactic banking clan, so much so that this ship unofficially used to be known as a banking clan frigate. The Munificent was used by the IGBC to guard treasury ships and other kinds of assets, but even more commonly deployed with IGBC droid armies, often used for debt retrieval or enforcing its other monetary policies. And so, as I said, the Outer Rim is a very lawless place, and it's not just because of these corporate entities, acting in chaotic ways. It's also because Republic law was just not enforced. There were no judicials anywhere. There were no, Jedi roaming around and settling things. And so these corpos basically had to handle things themselves. And so instead of a debt collection agency, they're going to send a robot with a blaster to take that money back. Absolutely terrifying. This is why the IGBC had its own fleet, and the Munificent was very efficient at what it did. The entire vessel could be automated. A physical droid crew of 200 was required to operate the physical systems. The ship looks quite skeletal in nature, and that is done purposely to save cost on hull plating. Inside the ribs of the Munificent-class Star Frigate, you can latch on hundreds of containers filled with goods and products. Having these pods externally was also a trick that a lot of bulk freighters use to make loading and unloading a lot easier. We did a video recently about the ISD, and we talked about how the hangar door is really like a bottleneck. Well, when the containers are on the outside of your ship, just like a large, naval freighter like in the oceans here on Earth, it's a lot easier when you have direct access to the containers. The Munificent was also equipped with two very, very heavy forward-mounted turbolasers that could melt an ice moon 1,000 kilometers in diameter or pierce the shields of a 10-kilometer wide Grade 3 battle station. Not necessarily a planetary shield, but, like a miniature version of one. So this is a pretty impressive loadout. It's a very serious amount of firepower for a ship of this size. And then spread across the rest of the ship, you had 26 twin light turbolasers, 20 light turbolasers, 12 medium flat cannons, an additional 40 retractable twin light turbolasers, surprise, and ordnance launchers, and 2 heavy ion cannons for messing up electronics. That's a ridiculous amount of firepower on a ship for this class. And then you also are going to have an onboard complement of 48 vulture droids. These ships posed a huge danger for the Republic fleet, and they oftentimes hunted in large packs of 4 to 6 ships. And like the Lucrehulk, many of the Munificent-class Star Frigates used by the Confederacy were fully paid off. And again, because corpos are pretty cheap, the cost per hull would have been pretty low compared to the frigates that were designed and procured by the military. Basically, these vessels were made out of paper. They're very easy to take out, but they had so much firepower on them that, they would do a lot of damage before being taken out. Next up, we have the Commerce Guild, a guild for commerce. Obviously. No, basically, they were a holdings company with assets in plenty of different industries, ranging from agricorp, consumer-facing retailers, service providers for various utilities, and one of their subsidiaries was the Mining Guild, which produces raw mineral input for a lot of different industries. Their contribution to the Confederacy was a couple hundred Recusant-class light destroyers, which were around the same length as a Venator-class Star Destroyer at 1,187 meters, but very skeletal, like the Munificent Star Frigate. These were mainly used as an escort for commerce activities. connectivity, and the Reich Santa had many external docking points as well to allow it to transfer goods from system to system. These vessels were heavily armed with multiple turbolaser emplacements and point defense weapons, but what made them super unique was the fact that the entire ship was controlled by a droid brain. You didn't need any crew at all, technically, which makes it a perfect fit for the Separatist Navy. Everything in the Confederacy military was designed with low cost in mind, and that is why they're able to field such a huge military despite being such a small state. There were a lot of dual-use vehicles as well, platforms like the C-9-970 landing craft, for instance. It was originally used as a cargo hauler for the Lucrehulk battleships. It could remove massive amounts of cargo and deliver it groundside, or it could take an assault battalion of droids along with a bunch of tanks and deploy them inside of a target city. The CIS Navy was basically designed in complete contrast to the Republic's naval force, which focused far more on highly specialized and highly trained clone troopers and state-of-the-art starships that were purely built for war. But sometimes simplicity and also quantity and cost-effective solutions can win the day. And I think if the Sith weren't playing both sides, I think the Confederacy had a real good chance at either forcing a stalemate or even defeating the Republic Navy, especially in those first few months of the war. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.